As I mentioned in the introduction, you went from intern at NASA in the 80s to high level leadership and all of the different awards you won and all the accolades you have. And as you know, parents may be listening to this and they're like, well, that is the dream for my child, internship to high level leadership. And nowadays that seems a little bit less commonplace as it perhaps was in the 80s and 90s, even early 2000s, when someone started someplace and retired from there. Did
Right.
you ever think about leaving NASA? Did you think when you were an intern, boy, I want to be here on my last day as an employee of something?
Not at all. In fact, when I began at NASA, literally in the interview that I had, I informed the people that, because I was invited to interview at NASA, that I had dreams of doing something else. It had to do with the changes of heart that I had in school. But I had gotten into this internship program, and NASA had my background, and they wanted to interview me for some reason. I guess they found out I did study aerospace engineering early in my college days. But I was very candid with them, and I said, I'm looking for other opportunities, and those didn't pan out. And so my dad encouraged me to take this job, and he said, you can use this to get experience, and then go on and do what you really wanted to do. And that's what I thought I was going to do. Is that I was going to work for NASA for 3 or 4 years, get some experience, and then leverage that experience for another opportunity. Well, 1986 happened, January specifically, and that's when our space shuttle Challenger exploded, killing the 7 astronauts. And that event had a searing impact on me in many ways. And I write about this in the book, and I'm happy to share more. But that incident is what caused me ultimately to flip my script, where I said, I'm going to make a career at NASA. And I'm going to try to go as far as I can go in this agency, because what I learned out of the Challenger incident, when I had the privilege of being involved in some of the post tragedy activities, is how much the nation resonated with NASA. That the very fact that I work for an agency could inspire people by virtue of who my employer was. I found a place where I felt I could make a big difference. And that's when I made the change in 86, 87, and the rest is history, as they say.
You said a lot there, so I want to like take the pieces back and unpack it. But
Yeah,
first, I want to mention the name of the book. We're going to put a link to on our website as well. But I'm sure people are like, "What's the book?" So I'm going to say it, and we'll put a link on the website. Manners will take you where brains and money won't. Wisdom from Mama and 35 years at NASA. So we got
yes.
the name of the book. Okay, so first of all, you said something that has become more part of conversations for young people and specifically connected to Gen Z, which
Yeah,
I think there's some writers, business writers specifically, who think that that may be something new. But I agree with what you had said, that you wanted to be part of something that mattered and you
yes,
wanted to attach your career to purpose. And there's a
yes.
lot of conversations about Gen Z and that being like new for that generation. But I think at our core, we all want that. We all want to be part of something with purpose. How did you realize? I realized that Challenger situation was, I mean, just so tragic and it captured the nation. But at what point did you realize that NASA had purpose?
Yeah. It really came down to a specific day and a specific moment in my life. And it may seem not necessarily trivial, but how can something like that have such a dramatic impact? So, how I got involved in some of the activities at NASA after Challenger was the agency decided to take the backup astronaut to our teacher, Krista McAuliffe, who was a teacher on the shuttle who was killed. Well, all astronauts had backups in case somebody gets sick or couldn't make it or whatever it is. Sort of like in sports, you have a substitute. Well, the backup to Crystal McAuliffe was a woman named Barbara Morgan from Idaho, a science, elementary school teacher. And the head of education at the time asked me, I was in California. I think Barbara's family was in California. She also had gone to Stanford. If I would take Barbara around the country to talk to teachers and students, not only about what happened with Challenger, but to just be a face of NASA for people to express their grief. In moments of great grief and tragedy, people want to be together. They want to connect with their loved ones. They want to connect with people. And Barbara was a symbol of NASA at the time because most people really were focused on the teacher. Now, there are obviously other astronauts who perished as well, but Barbara, it stood out in many ways. So my job was to be her sidekick. I would go to her talks and things like that. And there was one in particular in Los Angeles where, as usual, I would introduce Barbara and I would talk a little bit about NASA, and then she would speak. And I would stand off to the side and I would wait for her to get finished. And almost always, what would happen is that when she was finished with her talk, the students and the teachers or whoever was in the audience would run up to the dais and they would ask for her autograph and want to talk to her. And part of my job was to kind of be the bad guy, to say, I'm sorry, but it's time to go. We have to catch our flight either for the next event or whatever.
So you were her bouncer, basically.
I was the bouncer. That's right. Well, on this one occasion, I'm standing off to the side, waiting her to fish, and this little boy came up to me, and I'm tall, and I'm standing up, and he's, like 10 years old, and he's on the floor, and he has a notebook in his hand with a pen, and he's just holding it up to me, like looking at me in these big eyes, and I'm thinking he wants me to get his autograph from Barbara, and I said, well, go ahead and get in line. I'll make sure that she signs your book. It's okay. And he looked at me and he says, no, I want your autograph. And I said, my autograph? I'm not the astronaut. She's the astronaut. Barbara was a trained astronaut, of course. And I said, don't you want the astronaut's autograph? He looked at me and he goes, no, I want your autograph because, you work at NASA and that's just so cool. And that's the moment when I said, wow, if I can work at an agency where just because of the kind of badge I wore, some little kid was inspired to want to get, I'm a no name bureaucrat autograph just because I work for NASA, then this is where I want to be. And my purpose then became, how can I use whatever talents and skills that I have to inspire many more people? And that's what I chose to do. Ultimately, I became the head of all of NASA education, running, among many things, our internship program, where we funded tens of thousands of students around the country and even around the world. And I'm very proud of my tenure at NASA, and I'm proud of the fact that there are many students that I can name and now who have gone on and flourished and become had great engineering or scientific careers, and I know that I had a small part in that. And that really became my purpose, is to do my part for our next generation. So that's the story.
That's a great story. And for people who are younger than, if you were born in the 80s, you don't remember Challenger. And I
Yeah,
was, in elementary school, and a couple of things really stand out to me. And as a young girl, seeing a woman on a
yes,
spaceship was so surprising. That was just so different. And there had never been the level of publicity
right,
around that crew. And it sort of was the first time that a crew became part of the education. And so elementary schools and middle schools and high schools all over the country were
we're watching.
connected to this one trip, because there was this
Yes,
elementary school teacher who was going to do work and then bring it
yes,
back and we could all learn. And it
yes.
really brought the space, the space race that our parents and grandparents talked about to this generation. And everyone was watching it, and people who are older than my age and older have them, like, you can say where you were, when it
Yes.
happened and the explosion and the pain and the tragedy and the grief. And
Yes.
and it did change how everybody thought about NASA.
Yes, I think so. And fairly, there were abundant of critics about, why we rushed to launch. And there's a lot of history that commissions that were done to analyze that. And it's fair to take a deep dive into that. But it's safe to say that, even though we had lost astronauts in the line of duty before, there was the Apollo 1 fire that happened much earlier. It wasn't visible. It wasn't on television. That was on a launch pad, and it was a very unfortunate engineering problem that caused a fire. But nobody saw that live. Here, the entire world was watching this launch on live television. And in this bright blue sky, the orbiter just exploded, and the families were there, and so it was just it's I hate to use a 9/11 analogy or metaphor, but it's kind of like that, where it was visible and it just was so um, uh, jarring to people. That's why it stuck. And so it's hard to imagine what it was like if you weren't around in those days, but you can imagine similar events if you're younger that happened to you, that in that moment you may not realize it then, but you look back and said, this is what really changed my life. Sometimes it's a professor or a teacher, or sometimes it's something that bad happened to you, or something that really great happens to you. But you can look back and see how that caused you to go in a different direction, and that's exactly what happened to me.